Thank you for coming to my session, Layman's Perspective on a Building Project. What did I get myself into? So I'm a construction project manager with Eurofins Lancaster Laboratories. Lancaster Labs, Eurofins is a testing network. We're a contract laboratory. We test everything under the sun, pharmaceutical products, food, environmental samples. Lancaster Laboratories is in Lancaster, PA. I'm actually a remote employee based out of San Diego, California. So I'm going to talk about introducing myself, defining layman. I'm going to compare a building project to a lean project. The focus of this is going to be comparing a building project to aquascaping though. Don't worry, I will define what that is. And what does it take for a layman to be successful? So I'm going to provide high-level overview of a building project. I'm going to be referencing the San Diego building project that Eurofins has undertaken. I'm going to define some similarities between a lean project and a building project, and then go a little bit into the weeds as far as comparing a building project to aquascaping. So my background, I've worked at Eurofins for 8 years. Prior to that, my degree, I graduated from Rutgers University in 2008, degree in biology, minored in chemistry and anthropology. I studied monkeys in Kenya and Argentina, and that was originally the plan before I took a job working at a laboratory right down the street from my high school, an environmental lab testing water samples. That led me to the opportunity to move to California to work for a food lab before joining Eurofins, at which point with Eurofins I ended up becoming a lean project manager, so driving process improvement at an environmental lab. Prior to all of that, I never worked in construction, always worked in restaurants and retail while in college and in high school and things. So I got into laboratory operations after doing lean process improvement at one of the sites in San Diego. Eurofins has 3 labs in San Diego. How I ended up applying for this position to leading a building project in San Diego, essentially, I worked on doing a lease extension for the business I was working for. We extended for 3 years, and that meant the bigger project, a consolidation of sites into one building, went to one of the other laboratories within the Eurofins network, and I was on a call with the presidents of those company and my now boss, where the laboratory who was going to be leading the project ended up identifying somebody in-house, a project manager that would lead this project, and they both were under the impression this was something that this individual could just do on the side as a little part-time gig, a side hat to wear. And on that call, I remember Sam said, no, this is a full-time job. At this point in time, we were looking to build 80,000 to 100,000 square foot lab building. As this project developed, the scope grew because Eurofins acquired another business, and the scope grew to 200,000 square feet of multi-tenant laboratory building. Said, no, this is a full-time job. So what happened was I heard the surprise in their voice that that was the issue, that it was a full gig. So I ended up reaching out to that president immediately after that call and said, hey, I know this is your gig, but if you are going to hire somebody to lead this project, I'm interested. So that got the ball rolling, and that led me to being the local person in San Diego driving this project for 200,000 square feet. So what is a layman? When you look that up in the dictionary, one is a non-ordained male member of a church. Okay, let's see what the second one was. A person without professional or specialized knowledge in a particular subject. So we're not going to, do I meet the definition of layman to continue? I think I do. I mean, we're not going to talk about religion today, so sorry if that's what you guys are hoping for. But yes, I really have no specific knowledge on how to build a building. I know some lab stuff, but that's about that. So I had mentioned I drove lean process improvement at Eurofins before taking this role. So I don't know if you guys are aware what lean is, but really high level, it's a process improvement approach that uses collaborative team approach to improve the performance by systematically removing operational waste and reducing process variation. So the key takeaway from lean process improvement is you're working with the people who are actually doing the work. You're talking with, in my particular case, I'm talking with the scientists, watching them in the lab, understanding what they do, trying to help them to improve the way that they work. I'm not talking to the people who sit in the offices who they think they know what the scientists are doing. We're actually working with the people who are actually doing the work day in and day out because they really know where the inefficiencies are in their day-to-day process. So how is running a lean project similar to a building project? So in a lot of cases, it's really any project. You want to have a project charter. You want to understand what are the goals of the project, what is the situation. You want to define who is part of this team and who is responsible for what. We want to make sure a big component of leading the project is managing the stakeholders and the expectations of the stakeholders, because oftentimes you're working with, in my case, scientists and people who work in the lab, but the stakeholders are the people who sit in the offices and they have expectations on what they want, and you need to be able to manage what is realistic. Being the PM, you need to be organized and you have to be detail-oriented. The more you are, the better, because you're going to have things pulling all over the place and you're going to be herding cats constantly. You want to follow up regularly with the agreed-upon roadmap and responsibilities, and you need to make sure you're going to holler and speak up when there's problems and when things are getting off track. Working with space owners and understanding their needs. As I said, lean, we talk with the people who do the work. We did the same thing with the design. So just want to give a few examples of working with the scientists and trying to help them understand and figure out what their needs are. So this first example, a hood example, I don't know if you guys know what a fume hood is, so it's a safety device that has a sash and it has ventilation that scientists work in for protecting themselves and protecting their samples from contamination. So essentially, dangerous fumes and chemicals, you work in a fume hood. So we were designing 2 very large labs for one of the businesses, roughly 5,000 square feet, each of these labs. And we had the benches all laid out, and we started placing equipment. And we started figuring out, this is all working on the computer, figuring out where equipment's going to go. So I start asking questions like, well, we don't need any fume hoods in this lab, because we were putting a lot of equipment in there and we weren't putting any hoods. So they say, no, it's fine. So one day after that meeting, I'm walking through the laboratory and I see somebody working in a fume hood who was in that meeting, and I'm pretty sure I knew what they were doing. They were preparing samples to go on a piece of equipment that we put in the lab with no fume hoods. So I interrupted him, or once he was done, I interrupted him and said, hey, what are you working on? It's like, I'm making mobile face. So where are you doing that? In the fume hood. Think back to our meeting yesterday. Did we put any fume hoods in the room where you're doing that? No, we didn't. So with lean, with laboratory design, there's an expression with lean, go to Gemba. Gemba is Japanese. Go to the shop floor, go to the floor, see the space, see what they're currently doing, follow them, see what's going on, because I was in a room with 10 scientists, and not one of them said we needed a fume hood in this space, where they clearly needed multiple. R&D example. One of the businesses, the R&D team, I had told the manager of that group, hey, we're going to start placing equipment in the section in the lab you're going to go. Feel free to include a couple of your scientists. He invited his whole team of 10 scientists, all PhDs. I don't know if you guys have worked with PhD scientists before. They think in a very unique way, and that's why they're good at what they do. That first meeting, I was completely overwhelmed. They were all saying different things, talking about different equipment, and with my educational background, I have some idea of what they're talking about, but I don't have all the knowledge. So it was a complete waste of an hour and a half of everybody's time. This is where you need to understand when to speak up. So the next session, I knew what to expect, and when all this chaos started coming from them, then I just said, stop. We're going to go into the lab and let's point these things out and put different colors piece of tape so I can understand what you're trying to explain to me. And then the meeting went great. It went smooth. They definitely were shocked when I interrupted them, but it got us moving in the right direction. Leadership versus scientists example. So when we were first deciding on how we were going to lay out the laboratory, the very high-level blocking exercise, we decided we wanted to take some equipment that's currently in a big lab space and make it its own little department so it can have its own little prep and everything. Own room, doesn't have to worry about bumping in with other people. When I showed that blocking to the leadership team the following week, they said, well, no, they don't do that. They do all their stuff at the same time. It's like, that's not what they're doing. So maybe they were doing that 5-6 years ago, but that's not how the process is working anymore. So being able to then say to leadership, I understand this is what you want, but this is what's really happening in your laboratory. And the last thing is battling for their time. Their jobs, the people that you're trying to get information from, is not to help you. Their job is to produce results so that we can generate revenue and we can pay for this thing. So it's always the bottom of the priority list, and you really need to have a balance of when do I push hard, when do I back off, and that's the same with lean and a building project and everything. The building projects can sometimes be a little easier because we know how much money is getting invested into it, but again, it's not their primary job to do this, so it's usually again up on the bottom of the priority list. And lastly, over-communicate. It's really important to keep everybody in the loop on what is going on, so everybody's aware and on the same page. So now that I've briefly kind of compared it a little bit to a lean project, how does this compare to that? I don't know. So first, the high-level building project process and what is aquascaping. So I'm sure a lot of companies have a similar process. This is the Eurofins process. So essentially, we start with a project initiation. I'll dive into these. We decide if we want to purchase a property, then we design the layout and get approval, then we get a final budget approval, then build, and then move in. So what is aquascaping? So aquascaping, it is dealing with freshwater tanks, fish tanks. It's a craft of arranging aquatic plants as well as rocks, stones, cavework, driftwood, in aesthetically pleasing manner within an aquarium. It's, in effect, gardening underwater. So project initiation. So in this first memo that we've run up to leadership, we're describing what the current situation is, providing different options. Do we lease? What are the size of the business? What are the types of functional areas? What are the areas that we're expecting to grow or think that we can really grow? So in San Diego, there's 3 businesses totaling roughly 75,000 square feet total currently. So we had developed, again, detail-oriented Excel files that had every single room with the size, the amount of people that work in there, and adding multipliers on it to try to gauge how much space do we need if we're going to really grow these businesses. At the same time, we're reviewing lease versus purchase options. What's the cost for construction in the region? I don't know if you guys are aware, San Diego, there's this thing we pay called sunshine tax. It just makes everything super expensive. So we need to take those into consideration. And finally, ask for a direction from leadership. What do you want us to do? This is where we are. What do you want us to do? So looking at this, for aquascaping, my situation I was dealing with was I had 3 different tanks. One was just a little glass fish tank tube. Another was a 5-gallon tank that had some live plants and CO2 in there, and then a very overcrowded 30-gallon tank. So going to a building project, when assuming you're going to purchase a property, you need to find a realtor. And in all honesty, you kind of bring a realtor on board a little before so you can understand what the leasing prices are, what is the cost to buy buildings. But then they really dive into searching for options for you. And you're going to present multiple options, cost analysis associated. Is it a building that we think we can renovate, or is it a tear down we have to build new, or can we buy a plot of land? We want to look at how far away is this new location compared to where it is today for employees. Yeah, maybe you can find somewhere to move 30, 40 miles away, but where do your employees live? Are you going to kill the business because half of them are going to leave when you start at this new facility? So San Diego is very expensive. We searched for a property for about 18 months. We left no stone unturned. We looked in every single area of San Diego to try to figure out what was the best. And we were looking at what the current leasing prices were, what the average commute time for employees, was it going to be better or worse based off of these locations. And these are all things that most realty companies can kind of help with the commute analysis and things like that. But no stone left unturned. So for the aquascaping, I wasn't looking for a larger tank, but usually when you get into that hobby, you start with one tank, and then you get another, and then you get another, and it just spirals out of control. So I was running some errands before going out with my girlfriend at the time, and I always just pop in a pet store because that's what you do. And there was a great deal, and so I bought a 55-gallon tank. I came home, and we were going to take my car to where we were going. I was like, we're going to take your car because there's something that barely fit in mine. So my memo, there was no formal memo, but it was, you're not setting up a 4th fish tank in this apartment. So the compromise was everybody that was in those 3 would go into this larger tank. So once we get into building design, very high level, you go from conceptual design to schematic, into design development, and into construction documents. We're going to look at what's in scope, so what businesses. Essentially, we were designing a multi-tenant building, but it was all Eurofins tenants within this one laboratory building. So the idea is we save money on shared common areas, shared conference room areas, break areas, etc. But what rooms and departments are needed, begin with size and shape of the building if it's a greenfield, blocking for rooms and departments based off the growth projections from that previous Excel file that you guys saw. So this was my first meeting going to an architect's office, and I had no idea what to expect. There's a lot through this process, you don't know what you don't know. And you need to be willing to say you don't know and ask for help and guidance when needed, and even to the point where I've said to the architects and contractors we signed on board, if I'm not doing something I'm supposed to be doing, tell me. It's just leave all egos aside, because at the end of the day, everybody's trying to work together to achieve a goal, and this was our goal. So, I walked in, we had lots of various different layouts of the property, and I told you how we searched for a year and a half, and our best option, what we ended up buying, was something that had high voltage power lines going over it and an underground jet fuel line that goes from San Diego Bay, the Navy bases, to Miramar, which used to be the Top Gun school. That was our best option on the table for us. So it's not easy to find a property, especially in San Diego. So after we had that footprint, we go into blocking, so the high level, and it just continues to get more granular. So we have blocks for the laboratory sizes based off the flow of the sample. Of it comes in, it goes to this room, and then it goes there, and then it goes there. And you want to try to do this working with the scientists and understanding what they do and what order they do these things. So after blocking, it gets, again, more granular. What is the bench layout? Do you need high-density storage? Do you need, how many people are we going to sit? How many offices? Who has to be in an office? Who can sit in a cubicle? Laying out the spaces before we start placing the equipment. So as we do this, we can also, when we have the room layout done, we've built models. We had certain groups and teams that when we talked to them about their workflow, we kind of understood that the traditional linear bench of lab space really wasn't what they needed. What would make it more efficient for them is to have it in a U. And they were a little apprehensive about that, and to say we're going to invest and change without even seeing it. So we built models out of cardboard and tube steel, and these were their pieces of equipment that they could move around with a U to understand what their workflow is. They could pretend what they were doing to see if this would really work for them. It turns out that they did like this idea and this setup, so we stuck with this design. But again, this is just an additional tool and thing that you can do to try to help people understand when you're really going to possibly change the way they do things before you invest thousands, and in this case millions of dollars to build something. And after that, we use SketchUp, which I did not draw this, but to draw out where exactly the equipment's going to be, and this is exactly how their workstation would look. So for the aquascaping, I had an idea in my head what I wanted to do. I didn't do a ton of drawings. I'm really not that good of an artist, but I knew I wanted to kind of do this rock wall that kind of went through the tank. I wasn't going to change the size of the tank, and had some ideas of where I wanted to place some driftwood and where plants would go around that. But then needing to understand what are the light requirements of these plants. Some require high intensity or different wavelength. Which way do those plants grow? Do they grow vertically or do they grow horizontally along the bottom of the tank? Do they need CO2? Do they need special temperature requirements? And then once I've had that in mind, what are the fish? What fish do I want? How many? What size? So rule of thumb for fish tanks, 1 inch of fish per gallon. And I always go over that. Which isn't the end of the world. It just means you have to change your filters more and do water changes more often. So it's just more work to maintain. But where do those fish like to go? Do they like the bottom, the middle, or the top? So lots of different criteria, just like a laboratory building or really any type of building space. So once you have the size and the shape of these rooms and areas, what utilities do they need? How much power? Are there special gases? Do you need vacuum? Do you need compressed air? What other mechanical systems do you need? You should plan for redundancy. How large do the HVAC units need to be? Do you put a backup generator in? If you do, how big do you do it? Do you want to be able to run the entire building on this generator, or do you just have select pieces of equipment on there? How reliable is the current power supply in the area? It can help to guide that question. Specialty bulk items. What else do you need? Laboratories use a lot of different gases, so we put bulk tanks outside. These are some generators going in place and bulk gas tanks. Now, how do you know all these answers? I didn't know. I had no idea how to understand how do you size these things. So our design and construction team, we have this nice Excel file that goes for each room to help guide the engineers that are on your team that you hire, so that we can calculate how big all these things need to be. So we have one sheet where we're listing what the high-level needs are for the room, and then it gets a little bit more granular. Again, you're noticing this trend of everything starts very broad and it just continues to get more granular as time goes by. So everywhere where we have something marked yes, we need to put a comment. That's the first two tabs. The third tab is a list of every single piece of equipment. We want to know how much electric it needs, what type of voltage it is. Is it going to go on the backup generator? How much heat does it put off into the room? How many people are we expecting to go in the room? All these things really help to understand the sizing of this mechanical gear. What's the weight of the equipment? The physical dimensions, because we then use this sheet to help move this stuff in so we know, does it fit on a truck? Can it fit through a door? Just more detail, the better. And then lastly, if it's a piece of equipment like a fume hood that has exhaust, how much exhaust? How many of those are you going to have? Because the laboratories, you need to have a certain amount of air changes to keep everybody safe. So those fume hoods are constantly sucking air out. So again, lots of detail. So when you start looking at aquascaping for fish tanks, what kind of light do you want? What's the type of, how much light is required for the plants that you picked out for your tank? Filtration, so that the light I had was, they make everything so cool now. You have an app, you can change it, you can change the UV intensity, everything. Filtration, do you want a canister filtration that goes under your tank you don't see, or one that's hang on back, it has the little waterfall that comes? Have a backup. So I use the example of having a backup. I had a hang on back as a backup. After I set this tank up, I adopted 2 dogs, and every weekend the dogs saw me playing with my filtration canister in the sink, cleaning it out, leaving it on the floor, taking it all apart, and I turn around as I'm rinsing everything, and the dog chewed the electrical cord in half of the tank. I had other plans like, well, at least I have a backup one to hold me over. But again, that was the dog tornado that took out my filtration, and fortunately I had a backup, so I didn't have to stress too much. CO2 for plants. Do you want to have a gas cylinder tank, or they sell these little cartridges? There's various different bubble counters which control the amount of CO2 that's going into the tank. So just lots of different things to look into. So once for final design, we have detailed drawings for final pricing and permitting. They include sketches with elevations, and we begin procurement of long lead times. Procurement of long lead times, guys, I think everybody's aware of what COVID did to supply chains. When we were designing this, we were looking at steel was over a year. Electrical panels, over a year. Switches for the electrical panels were at 18 months. All things that me alone as a layman, I have no idea. That's where we're relying on the team, relying on the contractors to help understand what the situation is. So this is, again, just gets more granular, these designs. We had benches before. Well, what's going on the benches? What are the cabinets that are going underneath these benches? Do they need cabinets? Do they want a shelf? So again, it just gets more and more granular as you go through this process, and the more detail-oriented you are, the better. I had mentioned you don't know what you don't know. I remember I got a copy of a PDF of one of the drawing sets from our architect, and there was this little fisheye thing, and I was like, why these all over the place? I don't know what they are. They are in my way. I learned after the fact that when you click on those, they put a view on the right so you can actually see what it would look like if you're staring right at it. I didn't know that. I started deleting those off there. It's like, these are in my way. So again, you don't know what you don't know. What I should have done was ask, hey, what is this, before I started deleting stuff. But fortunately, it wasn't the parent copy. So final design. So fish tanks. I wanted to make sure that I could do the design that I wanted, but I also know that animals and fish, they want to hide. They don't always want to be out in the open, even though you want to see them. I really wanted to take into account what is the best environment for the fish that I'm putting in the tank. So I'm not going to say where, but all the collecting of rocks, that was quite a long lead time item. There's a couple beaches in San Diego where you're not supposed to take those. So it led me to every weekend, or at least one weekend day, go for a walk on the beach with cargo shorts and pick out a rock here, pick out a rock there. So it was a little bit of the opposite of Andy Dufresne. I wasn't taking my rocks out to the yard a little bit at a time. I was bringing them in a little at a time. And then the other long item is, so when you buy driftwood, there's a lot of tannins in that, so really need to constantly soak it and change the water out. Otherwise, if you just put that right into your tank, it's going to make the water brown for a very long time. So just things that you need to know. So once you get into construction with core and shell work, possibly site grading, staging of materials, you want to understand constructability. Again, these are all things that the contractors help to understand and help to manage, but you're their point, you're their go-to. They're going to come to you and talk to you if there's problems with delivery of equipment or delivery of materials and things like that. And it's up to you to communicate that to the rest of your stakeholders. So staging of materials. So when I talked about constructability, I kind of noticed when I started gluing these rocks together, it's like if I continue making this as one giant wall, I'm not going to be able to lift it, or I'm going to fear dropping it when I'm trying to put it in the tank. And I realized I need to do this in pieces. And unlike on the construction job site, it's okay to have an adult beverage or two when you're doing a fish tank. It's probably encouraged. So my coffee table was kind of occupied for a long time doing that, and somebody else that lived in the apartment wasn't very happy. But then staging material. Not one aquarium store has all the plants that you want ever, so you have to buy them from different ones, and it helps when you have 4 different tanks, so you just throw an extra one in there and you can keep them until you're ready to use them. So that's just the completion of the wall and how it looks going in. So construction interior walls and ceilings get installed, flooring's installed, furniture, equipment installed, and you look at all those cabinets. And the whole time as the project manager, you're going in and taking a look, comparing what they're doing to the actual plans to make sure that it's actually matching. There's issues that come up that you have to deal with, and maybe you have to get your facilities people involved, or the GC has to get the subs back on site to fix things. But you're constantly reviewing things and making sure that it's meeting those plans that you guys spent so much time designing. So again, with the fish tank, had stuff in place. Had I known I was ever going to do a presentation, I would have took a better picture rather than just a random video of all the plants in place. But again, it's kind of hard. It doesn't really show much, staging all of that stuff in the fish tank. But once it's all done and everybody reviews it and everybody signs off, you get certificate of occupancy. So you have this empty space and you're ready to start moving in. So what do you do? What if it's multi-businesses, like in this situation? Is there one business? Whose lease runs out first? Who's going in first? What departments are going to go in first? Can you afford to have any loss in your operation? So typically we try to do this in stages where we buy some new equipment, get that in space first, get it validated, ready to use, so you can kind of have a seamless transition from one facility to the new one as you try to continue to bring revenue in while you're moving and prevent interruption to the day-to-day operation. So these are just a few examples of different lab spaces that they got ready to go and move into. And again, so it's very hard because when you build a fish tank, you always want to just put all the fish in that you want under the sun right away, but it's really not good to do that because when you add the fish, they change the composite of the water, so you really need to allow time for them to adjust to the water levels and things even out. So have a few pictures of some Cory catfish that are kind of like the bottom of the tank. And I kind of want to just say when I got rid of this tank, because I didn't want to move it when I moved to a different place, I was kind of selling the fish, and this little gold one down at the bottom, they were expensive. They were like $30 a piece, and one day they were there, and then I didn't see them. I was like, did they really all die? And I never saw them. And then when I was getting rid of the tank, they were all still alive. I just did too good of a job giving them places to hide that I never saw them. But hey, it was a nice surprise. So after they move in, everybody's all happy, schooling, and we talk about growth. All these plants, they grow so quickly, especially when you have CO2. So you're constantly trimming, doing water changes and things, and it's a lot of work. And that was, just rewarding to see everything. So what does it take for a layman to be successful? Don't be afraid to ask for help and guidance. I said to the architects and contractors, tell me, what am I supposed to be doing? If I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, tell me I'm not doing that. Don't be afraid to speak up when you think there's a problem, because maybe it is a problem, and maybe it's something that needs to be taken care of, but maybe it's not. But if you're not sure, ask, say something. Be organized and super detailed. I was very fortunate. I have my now boss that was helping guide me, who I would go and ask all these things, but he has multiple projects that he's going on, so he doesn't know all the details. I need to know those. You need to know those things when you're the person on site and dealing with the stakeholders. And it helps to have a great team. These projects are long, 3 years, 4 years. It's an arranged marriage. You want it to be with people that you kind of get along and you you can joke with, because again, I'm asking them, tell me what I'm supposed to be doing. If it's coming from somebody you don't like, it's harder than say, all right, I'm going to do that. So it's really important to make sure you have a great team, because again, no one's can do it all by themselves, especially a layman who you don't know what you don't know. So it's great when you have a really good team that you can get along with and have a good time with, because it just makes the work that much easier, because there's so much time invested into it. Are there any questions? Yes?
Did you manage to meet the budget that you had laid out? And two, are you one and done, or is this kind of a career that you're moving forward with?
So I'm hoping to make it a career. The budget item is an interesting question. So we did our initial design of this 4-story. It came in way high. We didn't want to run that up the chain. We did a second design, came back still very high. We did a third design, and now we are considering canceling the project altogether. So we're kind of in a understanding, do we want to sell the property and take a loss, or do we want to continue going down this road? So to answer your question, we really haven't met a budget. We haven't built this thing yet, unfortunately. But I'm hoping to make this a career. I saw another question. Yes?
Just a question, you talked a lot of programming and planning.
Yeah.
But you said you haven't built the project yet.
Correct.
So did you manage the design contract at all?
Yes.
So did you select the architect or designer based on some criteria from their qualification standpoint, or did you kind of?
Yeah, so we did an RFP process. So we started with, I think, roughly a dozen architecture firms, and we narrowed that down. We asked for their qualifications and narrowed it down from 12, I think, to 4 that we then did interviews with. And again, I had somebody experienced who is now my boss out of Lancaster, PA, that helped guide me through this entire process of selecting architects.
Did you also rely on them for the budgeting as well?
Yes, yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, I got you.
Yes.
Did you say you work remotely?
I'm sorry?
Did you say you work remotely?
No, Eurofins.
No, he said you stated that you work remotely.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so I'm a remote employee of Lancaster Laboratories. So I technically work for the lab that's out of Pennsylvania, but I'm based in San Diego, helping the Eurofins businesses in San Diego. So that's how I'm remote. But when it comes to actually the San Diego project, I'm on site. I'm with those users. Yeah, sure thing. Sorry for the confusion. Any other questions? Yes.
How much is it, do you use the Skype method of project management when you have conversations with all your parties?
I'm not familiar with the psych method. Skype. Oh, yeah, so we use Teams and yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
So with all the lead times, the granular research on capabilities, possible solutions, and technologies, as a layman, how can you move quickly and effectively for your customers?
Yeah.
And still be so detail-oriented without kind of dragging the process?
Yeah, that's where it becomes a little bit difficult, and you really kind of rely on the team a little bit to help you. You know, it's not to say you're putting a lot of work in. You're not working just 40 hours a week, but really relying on the people who do know that you can trust and kind of develop that team, which I'll say in San Diego, I'm very fortunate because there was a lot of qualified builders, because it's a huge life science technology hub, so there's a lot of people there that know how to do it. I know that can be a little bit more difficult depending on where you are, but it's really relying on the people that you're hiring to be experts, which I know you take a risk doing that, but that's part of it. Yep. So, if there aren't any other questions, I thank everybody for attending my session, and I hope you guys can complete a survey. So, thank you guys.